Hello, welcome to the daily drawing. Today we're going to be drawing a hedgehog. They're super cool. All right, so to get started, this is actually going to be a super easy one. All we have to do is really draw a really massive kind of egg shape. It's a little wider on the back and a little smaller on the front, but not too much. So an easy way to do that is just start off with a really big parenthesis on the back, like this. And then we want to keep the bottom relatively flat, not too curved. So go a little bit flat and a slight smile. Then do a slightly smaller parenthesis on this side. And then our goal is just to connect them together at the top. So we have a slightly smaller side here and a slightly bigger side back here. All right, now that we have the basic body, what we're going to do is we're going to separate the head out from the body. Here we can kind of see the edge of its jaw right here. And then we can also see that this right here is its cheek. So it can kind of help if you draw loosely, not too dark, because we'll erase most of it. Just loosely draw a little head shape down here, which will take up a small portion of the front part of this smaller area. All right, so once you have about the size that you want for your head, then what I would suggest doing is go ahead and draw the muzzle. Here we can see that the muzzle makes kind of a triangle shape sticking out that's kind of rounded at the end of it. So starting somewhere at the bottom edge of the ovally circle that you drew for the head, we're just going to draw a slight diagonal line going out of the nose, or going out of the head area. After you draw that slight diagonal line, you're going to draw a very tiny parenthesis on the front. And then we want to connect it to the bottom of the head. So I'm just going to curve that until it touches the bottom of the head shape. So this will get you your muzzle. You can erase the inside of the head area for the muzzle. All right, so here we have this right here is where the nose is going to go, is on the tip of here. Do we have a mouth? We don't see the mouth at this particular angle. It's underneath this muzzle area because we're seeing it from the top-ish view, so that's why we can't really see it. All right, now from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and do the nose. So if this right here is my muzzle, this is the tip where the nose is going to go. I see that there's just like a little black circly thing. There is like the actual nostrils. If you want to do detailed, you can. So for simple, I'm just going to do a small parenthesis or a small circly shape to kind of cap off the tip of the nose, and then keeping a little bit of the lower muzzle like this. Now, if you want to go for more realistic, you can add an additional parenthesis on the inside like this so that you can have the actual shape of the nose. I'm going to fill mine in dark just so that I don't forget to do that later. Now, I don't see the mouth. If you want to see, like, say if you wanted the mouth open like it was, I don't know, like talking or making noises, you can draw like a very tiny parenthesis or a very tiny smile underneath it, followed up by a second one. And that can kind of show you that there was indeed a mouth underneath there. So that's something that's optional. You don't have to do that part if you don't want to, but if you want to add a little bit of something there, you can. If you don't want to do that, then just don't change the bottom of the muzzle because it would stay just flat like normal. I'm just going to add a mouth just to give a little bit more character. All right, so from here, we can go ahead and draw the eye. If we look at it this way, the nose is going to line up at a diagonal line with the eye and the ear. So if it helps, you can either draw the ear first or you can draw the eye first. I'm just going to very loosely draw a diagonal line, and then you can choose to draw the ear or the eye first. I'm going to go ahead and do the eye first just because I think it'll be easy. If I go up from the corner where the muzzle met the head and I go straight up, that's where the eye should be, is directly above the place where the muzzle met the head. And then the eye is just very, very round, so you can get away with just drawing a simple circle. You can make it a little bit wonky to make it feel a little bit more realistic, so it's not like a perfect circle, but just any kind of roundish shape would work in this particular area. You can make it really big for more of a cartoony effect, or you can make it really small for more of a realistic effect. So it's kind of up to you what you want to go for. I'm just going to leave a little highlight, just to give it a little bit more life. Now, the second eye is a little bit more tricky because it is so turned. It's almost hard to see the second eye. So what I would suggest doing first, before you draw the eye, draw this little lump right here. This is its kind of brow bump. So from the corner right here, I'm just going to draw a small parenthesis like this. That's going to be its kind of eyebrow bump. And notice that just went right above the muzzle and kind of even with it. Now, after I have that brow bump, notice that there is a texture there. If you want to change that to have a texture to make it feel more realistic, you can. So I'm just going to add a very slight kind of Z line for a texture. So all I'm doing is I'm just going like this back and forth, kind of slightly different diagonal lines. So it's like a broken Z line. And then we can see that there's just a parenthesis of dark color on the side. So I'm just going to do a small parenthesis. I'm just going to fill it in black, and that would be my second eye. And if we kind of compare it to the previous eye, it's at a slight upwards diagonal, so it's not perfectly even. It's slightly higher up than the previous eye. Now from here, so this right here was the brow area, so you can extend that out a little bit higher up if you want to, if you're going for more of a detailed look. And then you can also extend that down until it touches the muzzle. I would just suggest while you're extending it, do little broken lines instead of a smooth line, just to give it a little bit more texture. All right, now I do want to go ahead and do the edge of the cheek. Here we can see this little fluffy texture going out the side that's helping define the cheek area. So if you'll notice, we have a little curve already, and it curves up to the top of the head where we just kind of ended that previous Z-line. What I would suggest doing is very lightly erase some of it. I usually erase just enough so I can barely see it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add that Z-line just by kind of making a wiggle line back and forth that we're kind of breaking up. Don't make it too long. You can feel free to add a couple just like individual hairs. And notice the direction that I'm making those points face. They're kind of pointing to the side, like in this direction and this direction. And gravity's kind of pulling the fur down. So that can kind of help you out a little bit. And if you want to add a couple on the inside, you can, but that's optional just if you want to make it feel a little bit more realistic. All right, now that we've got the Hedgie's cheek, now we can go ahead and do kind of like, if you'll notice, we have shorter fur going all the way around down its jawline like this, and then we have the ear behind that fur. So I'm actually going to go ahead and do that before I do the ear. And notice that the top of the head, this is the top of the head right here where the spines get close together. So the top of the head is actually a little bit higher up, and then we have its forehead spaces lower down. So if you'll notice, it kind of curves and make a parenthesis like this going above the eyes. So what I'm going to do is I'm very loosely draw a parenthesis above the eyes until I get, notice that we still have that diagonal line, until I touch that diagonal line is where I'm going to stop that parenthesis. And then I can just draw the same thing that I did before. So just kind of like little zigzag lines, little diagonal lines, little hatchy lines, just to indicate that that's where the fur is going. And then once I hit that diagonal line, then I'm going to do the same exact thing I did here, just kind of facing the opposite direction. Because once again, just like it did before, gravity is going to slowly pull that softer fur down, so that it looks like it's kind of facing more of a downwards angle rather than perfectly straight up. And of course, you can erase the softer lines afterwards. And once you're done with that, you can erase any of those guidelines on the inside of the head. I would suggest go ahead and keep this line for the muzzle because their muzzles are long and they do stick out. And one more thing before we finish up on this part of the head. If you'll notice, we have that kind of spiny texture here of that fur going around the eye area. So to get that, if you're wanting to add that for a detail, just add a little bit of that kind of diagonal texture going around the eye and then going back down to the cheek area. There is a couple around its actual eye itself. If you want to add some more of those textures, you can. All I'm doing is I'm just going like this with my pencil and then just kind of changing the angle that I do that in order to help create that texture. So also be careful not to make that too long. You want to keep this fur really short looking. If you make it look too long, it's going to look like the spines that we're going to do here in a minute. So make sure that you keep that fur pretty short and kind of like really small lines rather than long lines. All right, so I'm done with the Hedgie's face. If you want to add like the little dots and whiskers, those are some alternate details that if you want to add, you can, but they're kind of optional. They're not necessary to communicate that it's a hedgehog. All right, so before I do the spines, I'm actually going to go ahead and do its ear. I don't really see very much of the ear over here. I see a tiny bump to indicate the ear, so I'm not going to see very much there, but I will see a bigger bump over here. So I noticed that it's going to be diagonal from the nose. So here's the nose, eye, the ear is going to be right here in this area. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw a big frown. And you can make the ears smaller or bigger. It kind of depends on what kind of size you want to go for them. I'm going to make mine a little bit bigger just so they're more pronounced. You can draw them smaller, of course, if you want. So you just draw a big frown like this and then start on one side of the fluff, stop on the other. And then what we want to do is we want to have that crease where it looks like the ear is folding in on itself. So I would erase anything on the inside first just to clean it up. And then I'm just going to draw another frown on the inside like this. Now, whenever I get to shading, I'm going to shade this part in darker just so that it makes it feel more like the inside, but I'll do more on that later. All right, so there's one ear. Now, the other ear is actually behind the spine, so I would go ahead and draw the spines first before the ear. I can go ahead and erase the top of the head because I don't really need it anymore. And then before I start getting too crazy with all of these spines, I wanted to make sure that I know where the long spines are and where the shorter spines are. So I'm going to very lightly draw kind of like a little diagonal line going all the way down until it gets to the point where the spines stop, and that's kind of on the bottom of the body. Now, if you feel like you need to make the body bigger or smaller, go ahead and do that before you start your spines, because once you start the spines, it kind of gets into it, so it's a little hard to change afterwards. We're going to do the foot last, so we're going to focus on the spines first. All right, so the most important thing about the spines is just paying attention to the direction that they're going. So if you'll notice that they kind of face upwards on the top here, but then they slowly start to curve and face backwards to the point where they are actually facing down like this. So what I'm going to do, just so that it's not too crazy detail, because otherwise it's going to take forever, is I'm actually going to do the outer spines first, just to get that texture of the outer edge, and then I'm going to slowly build up texture on the inside. So on the outside, my goal is to do kind of what I did here, but longer and pointier spines. So I'm just going to do long kind of triangular shapes like this. So what I'm doing is I'm just going up, and then I'm just bringing it, I'm starting on the tip where I stopped, and I'm just bringing it back down, and I'm continuing to do this over and over. It's okay if you switch it up. You can have some kind of face the other way. You can have some go straight up. So get a variety until you're satisfied with the look of it. So I'm just going to add a bunch of those. I'm going to slightly change directions every now and then. I'm just really looking closely at my reference picture so that I don't get too crazy with it. I see that some parts where maybe it's like fluffing its spines up intentionally. So some parts are going in a weird direction that they wouldn't naturally flow in. And of course, if you don't like the look of this like smooth line in there, feel free to erase it first so that you don't have to do as much erasing later. Just don't erase it so much that you can't tell where you're going to go, because sometimes that can get confusing later. So really focusing on making those long and kind of pointy and sharp looking to really emphasize that kind of spiny texture. And then I'm also going to carry that spine texture down here on this line, like so. All right, so now that I have the outer part of the spines, now I can do the inner spines. You don't have to do every single spine. The key thing is just to really make it feel as though the interior of the body is covered in spines. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump around, and I'm going to add, trying to keep the same length of spines as what I've been doing. I'm just going to add series of like 2 and 3 spines. Sometimes I'll add individual spines. And this is just so that I don't have it so overwhelming, but I also want to make sure that it still looks as though it's spiny in there. So notice that I am leaving some white gaps just so that I don't have too many. And you can leave some areas completely smooth if you want to. Whenever it comes to drawing, you just kind of sort of draw what you feel like it needs to have to represent. You don't have to draw every single detail. But sometimes leaving out too much might make it to where it's a little confusing to where it would feel bold in that particular area. So here I'm just going to go ahead and add a variety of these. And you can add a couple just individual lines like this. So you don't have to have every single line. You can add just individual hatch lines so they don't all feel so solid. And notice I'm just kind of spacing out. I'm starting to curve them downwards when I get to the bottom of the body. So I'm really focusing and paying attention to what direction I need to draw these spines, which is so important when you're drawing something that has this much texture to it. And the reason that I'm going so crazy on the top part is that on the bottom part, I want it to look very different because this white fluffy fur area, I want that to look separate from the spines. So I'm going to make the top part look really, really textured. And then on the bottom, I'm going to make that look a lot less textured so that I have a good contrast between the textures. Contrast is just where you have like something that's really, really strong compared to something that's really, really weak. So for example, high contrast and value would be really, really dark areas next to really, really light areas. In this case, we're going to have really, really heavy textures. Here, what I'm doing is I'm just going back and adding just individual lines in those white spaces. Not all of them, just enough to kind of fill in some of those gaps in the direction that those spines are going. And notice that I'm not making any of them like super, super long. I'm just making them the length that I think they need to be for the particular area. So don't make like a really long spike like this, because that would look awkward. So, but anyway, yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and call that top part done. I'm satisfied with the texture. Before I do this leg, I'm going to go ahead and do the fur that's around the leg. Here we can see the fluff is kind of facing downwards like this. So on the edge of this line that I have drawn here, I'm going to very lightly erase it so that I can still see it. And then I'm just going to add that fluff texture, kind of like what we did here originally. So getting that really kind of shorter fur, adding a variety, kind of like what we just did on the spiky areas, but really trying to keep it loose and keep it kind of closer together and softer looking. All right, then on the inside, if you want to, you can leave it totally blank, or you can add very, very few. Don't go crazy because we want it to look different than the top. You can add just a few little fluffs in order to make it look like it's softer fur. Just keep in mind, you want this to look different from this. So don't make that as fluffy or spiky as this part. All right, so the last thing we got to do, now we only see one foot because the rest of them are kind of covered in the rest of the spine, which I'm actually going to lower this down just kind of help cover that particular area. So, but the rest of this body is kind of underneath the belly. I do see this leg kind of poking out a little bit. So, the location for that, if I go from the ear down, that's where the leg kind of starts coming out of. So if I go from the ear down, that's where I'm going to have it. I'm going to start slightly in the body. I'm going to do a very small diagonal line until I just reach the end of the last fluff that I drew. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw a little parenthesis like this, really tiny. And then I'm going to follow that up with another really close parenthesis like this. And then I see that he has 4 toes exposed. These 2 toes are a little bit more exposed than the other, so I'm going to give them a little bit more space like this. So now they do have claws. If you want to add these claws on it to make it look more realistic, you can. They're just like little bitty triangles, kind of like with the little spikes that we drew up here would be their little claw shapes. If you want to leave the paw smooth though, you totally can. Then I see that the back of the leg does go inside the body a tiny bit. So I'm just going to follow that back up into the body a little bit. And then I'm going to erase this right here. Now we're not quite done yet. We want to do one more thing. We can see the fur kind of go in front of the leg. So there's fur behind the leg and there's fur on top of the leg. So before I call it quits, I'm going to add a little bit of a fur texture on the top of that leg that makes it look as though it's kind of going up inside the body. So kind of like cover up the top edge of the leg with fur so that it makes it feel more on the inside of the body. All right, so now that I have that part done, there is a little bit of fur on the leg. So if you want to add a little bit of fur texture, you can. That's optional. And then if you want, notice that we can't really see the feet on the other side. It's kind of covered in shadow. So if you choose to do shading, I would suggest shade underneath the hedgehog fairly dark. That way it makes it feel as though there's more of a shadow cast by the hedgehog itself, especially right here underneath the neck and beside the foot. That way it gives us a little bit more feeling as though it's like on the ground. And I'm just going to slowly lighten that shadow as I get further away. You can also do that same shadowy technique below the belly like this. And then just make it slowly get smaller and smaller as you get to the outside part because the belly is actually kind of touching the ground back there. And then just kind of lightly shade it like this. That way it kind of feels like it's on the ground. And then I would suggest adding a little bit of shadow to the top of the foot if you're choosing to shade. Okay, so I'm pretty much done with the drawing part. I'm pretty satisfied with it. I think it looks really cute, and I love hedgehogs. They're adorable. One thing that I did forget to add was this other ear back here. So if you're wanting to add the other ear, all you have to do is just draw a little frowny face. And that's literally it. There's nothing more to it. It's just a simple frown, and then we have our other ear done. So if you want to leave it like this, you can. If you want to do a little bit more shading, you can do some more shading. So for example, I would shade this other ear. I would shade a little bit on this side of the head, just because it's, I want that muzzle to stick out a little bit more. And the muzzle itself is a little bit darker than the whites of the fur. So I'm going to shade that muzzle a little bit so that it looks a little bit darker. And then I'll also shade this foot a little bit more. And then I'll shade a little bit behind the jawline just to help separate that. And then from the looks of it, it looks as though these spines are a little bit darker than the white parts of the fur. So I'm going to shade that just a little bit. And I'm also going to shade the ear a little bit more as well as the inside of the ear. Now, very important, if you accidentally overshade it and you can no longer see your textures, that tells you that you're going a little bit too dark and you might need to lighten up a little bit. So if you're shading too dark, feel free to hold your pencil differently so that you have a little bit of a different grip to it. And you can use your eraser to help you draw as well. So in this part, it seems like the fur's darker up here and then it gets lighter back here. So I'm not going to shade the back of the body. I'm just going to focus on shading the front areas like this. That way the parts that I've already drawn will work good enough for a shadowy texture for that back area. And I think that would be fine, and I'm satisfied with that. All right, so there is my little hedgie all in shadow. And I think that's what I would call done. All right, so I hope you guys had fun drawing this with me. And I would love to see your guys' results, especially if you did something weird to it. I've seen like, I think it's a Pokemon, I forget his name, like Shaman maybe, but he has like, he's a little hedgehog and he has like little flowers and stuff in his back. And I think it'd be really cool to add like some nature and plants kind of with this animal, since they are such a like a animal that lives in nature. Would look really cool. So I would love to see what you guys do with the little guy. And I hope you guys had fun and have a good day. All right, bye.